STEM City USA Healthy Doses series is your passport to a balanced lifestyle. Hosted by Dr. Tiffany Anderson and presented in the Boston Scientific Auditorium. And now, Dr. Tiffany Anderson.
Good morning, everyone, and happy 4th of July weekend. My name is Rayondon Kennedy, and this is Healthy Doses, streaming live from the metaverse of STEM City USA, brought to you by our sponsors, Boston Scientific. You're here for Healthy Doses. This is a show that we created to give you the tools and the resources that you need to be the best you possible, and that starts with a healthy mental health, a good mental health. And I want to introduce you to our host that's going to help us be the best us possible, Dr. Tiffany Anderson. Good morning, Doc.
Hello. Good morning, Ray. Good morning to everyone who is here this morning. We really appreciate you coming to check in with us on a Saturday. So today is all about self-care, right? Self-care, we hear it a lot. It's becoming really trendy, but it's something that we need to know more about, right? We need to recognize that it's not necessarily a privilege, but an obligation, right? So first, I want to start with a quote, all right? Just bear with me. Start with the quote. Close your eyes, get an idea of what this person is saying, right? So she says, "For so long, I did what made other people happy," the 41-year-old cover star explained to the Vogue magazine interview. "And I think in the last 2 years, I decided I'm going to make myself happy. And that feels really good. And even if that created changes and caused my divorce, I think it's really important to be honest with yourself about really what makes you happy. I've chosen myself, and I think it's okay for you to choose you." So Kim Kardashian actually said that. I used her quote because many of us actually may know who that is, but also because this individual has material wealth, right? She has all the things that a person may believe they need in order to practice self-care, and yet she wasn't practicing it. So I just use that example to let us know, again, it's not necessarily about privileges, right, or wealth. There's an obligation to ourselves to show up for ourselves each and every time and recognize that anyone can struggle with that, right? So when we come back from our commercial from our sponsors, Boston Scientific, we'll dive right into it.
Welcome back. So we are about to dive into the self-care episode, or as I like to call it, the Treat Yourself episode. But before we get started, everyone who is watching, I want to remind you that you can engage with Dr. Anderson and myself throughout today's episode live by by scanning the code in your top right corner. You see that QR code that's flashing? All you have to do is take your phone, open your camera, scan that code, and it will take you to a page where you can drop questions, you can leave comments, anything that you want to communicate with us, share your experiences with us. We would love to hear from you. And if you're watching in the STEM City metaverse, off to the left side of your screen, or maybe over there, you should see a chat button. You can interact with the audience members who are engaging with you, say hello, and just make comments on the show. We love to hear from you. Dr. Anderson,
Yeah.
we're about to dive into the self-care. This is one of my favorites. For those of you who are familiar with the show Parks and Recreation, the treat yourself, which stems from taking care of yourself. So Dr. Anderson, let's talk about self-care.
All right, let's talk about it. All righty. So I want to give a simple definition, and then I want to kind of dive into a deeper definition of self-care. Okay. So quick definition. Self-care is all about the practice of taking action to preserve one's own health, right? Just to preserve one's own health. According to the World Health Organization, and I chose this definition because I'm all about community and how we kind of intersect as one, right? So they define self-care as the ability of individuals, families, and communities to promote health, prevent disease, maintain health, and to cope with illness and disability with or without the support of a healthcare provider. I thought that was important to include because self-care, although it is about you, right? Recognizing your own self-care also impacts the folks in your community, impacts your family, and everyone around you, right? So if we, as individuals, practice self-help, self-care, we recognize that we are then helping and supporting those that have daily interactions with us, but also teaching our children, teaching our family and our friends that they too are a priority and they should take care of themselves as well.
Thanks, Dr. Anderson. So what does it look like, right? So you just gave us the definition, taking care, prioritizing. What does that look like? How does our audience members, how do you put that into practice?
Yeah. So if we just think about, because I think it's important that we have a better understanding of self-care, right? Because sometimes it feels extreme, or it feels like, every weekend I have to get a massage, or every day I'm going out and, I'm going shopping.
What's wrong with that?
It's balance. It's all about balance, right? And it's not that it's wrong. For those that can't, right? For those that aren't balling like you, right?
I wish.
Those that aren't like you, I want us to recognize that it doesn't have to look like that, and that's okay, right? And so self-care includes, right, staying physically healthy, right? We're thinking about what we're taking in our body, what we're eating, also our hygiene, right? Recognizing that simply getting up and showering and brushing our teeth, right? And just like what we're wearing, like how we're kind of showing up in the world, right? That's a part of self-care, right? So I just want to allow you all to recognize that it doesn't have to be so extreme, but it can be very simple as brushing your teeth, brushing your hair, right? Putting on clothes that make you feel good. That's a part of self-care. Nutrition, we talked about that and what that looks like, what's on your plate and what you're eating. Seeking medical care when needed. So going to those doctor's appointments, or simply going to your checkups, going to your dental appointments, right? Again, this is all about overall wellness, physical, emotional, and mental. We also want to recognize how to manage the stressors in our lives and how to take care of our own health and well-being, right? So that's a huge part of self-care. Honestly, one of the most important parts of self-care is what our overall wellness kind of looks like and how we're taking care of it. Ray, you asked, like, practice, right? Like, what does that look like in practice? What are some examples of self-care?
Yes.
And I'll provide examples throughout the entire episode because there's a list and so many, but just a few.
I have a list too, Dr. Anderson. I'm gonna tell you about my self-care.
Yeah.
How I treat myself.
We're gonna get to that.
Go ahead, Doc.
Okay, perfect. So a good one that I can't stress enough. Maintaining a regular sleeping routine. That is self-care. That is self-care. Right? And that's a whole nother episode in regards to the negative effects sleep deprivation can have on our bodies, right? So maintaining a sleep routine is self-care. Eating healthy, right? Spending time in nature, so getting outside, hugging a tree, believe it or not, is helpful. Grounding yourselves. I don't know if you all are familiar with this is just an example that I love. Taking off your shoes and putting your feet in the grass, grounding yourself to the earth, right? That is an example of self care, but that's also an example of being out in nature, right? Taking walks, being around water, swimming, that is self care, right? Some more enjoying time with family and friends, picking up a new hobby, right? We'll talk about that because I know you have a few. Picking up a hobby, a passion, something of the sort, right? Something that brings you joy, that is self care. Expressing gratitude, having a gratitude journal, writing out what you are um, joyful about, what you are grateful about. That is a way to not focus so much on what you don't have, but lean into what you do have, right? So just various behaviors that promote self-care, scheduling screenings for your doctor's appointments, right? Again, going to those checkups, med compliance. So taking medications if needed, right? And taking them on time. And again, prioritizing yourself in a way that encourages your overall wellness. And lastly, just being present with yourself, asking yourself what you need, what you're in need of. Because if you can't tell yourself that, it's kind of difficult to practice self-care in an effective way.
So, Dr. Anderson, basically, I mean, you just gave us a nice list of basically how to take care of yourself, and mentally, my mind processed it into three different areas. And you kind of touched on it earlier, but we talked about, kind of a mental aspect. When I think about mental, I'm thinking, maybe seeking therapy, prayer, meditation. You talk about journaling. I feel like that might be a mental area because you're getting your thoughts out, and so you're working on your mental. And then there's like emotionals. Um, you mentioned that, and I'm thinking, and let me know if I'm off base at all. But emotional things that affects your emotions. So maybe removing yourself from toxic situations or toxic relationships. So maybe even a breakup might be a form of self care, if you will. Or you mentioned Kim Kardashian in your quote earlier. She said it kind of led to her divorce, and usually that's a bad thing. But it sounded like she was saying, that this is a positive, right? Because she was in a bad place, and so she had to remove herself from that. So that feels more like an emotional. Would you say maybe date nights with your significant other, or would that be emotional, or would that be more of a physical, Doc? Because
Mm,
that was something that came to mind.
yeah, that's a great question. It depends on the person and how they kind of categorize what it would mean for them. Does that make
Hmm.
sense?
Yeah.
So if the date night could be the physical, right? Being very intentional about spending time with their partner, but the emotional connection that they garner from that date night may be emotional.
So some of these things can kind of jump between the different areas. So
Mhm.
it's not really just one or the other.
Yeah.
Um, what about turning your phone off? Disconnecting from, I guess, the world. Because the world could be a big stressor, if you will, especially when all the news is coming out or people calling. Because nobody really seems to call to say, "Hey, how you doing?"
Yeah.
It's usually a purpose behind it. You know what I mean? So sometimes turning the phone off is really, uh, for
Necessary.
me at least, a good way of like taking care of my mental and not overloading.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think it's definitely I mean, definitely mental. However, it also could depend on why the person's doing it. So
Hmm.
if it's because they're emotionally overwhelmed, and they want to take a step back, they may categorize that as an emotional kind of self care response, right? Like I need more time for myself to pour into myself, or this person is emotionally draining, so I'm taking a step back from them and limiting access to me, right? So
Hmm.
that may be kind of an emotional self care, but I love the categories. I just want us to do it more. I don't really care so much about where
Where
you
it is.
do it. I just want you to do it. Mhm.
Got it. So when we talk about doing it, right? We talked about all these good self. What does it look like if you don't have a good self-care routine? Like, what are the negative effects of not having a good self-care, or not prioritizing your self-care?
Yeah. The first one that comes to mind, I think that I see often in session is resentment. I see that often, I think, because folks may believe that their lack of self care may be the responsibility of someone else, or that they're pouring out so much to someone else that they become resentful of that person, or because of of the situation or the circumstances. And so resentment can definitely be a big one that I see, because the understanding is that, or yeah, the understanding, before they understand more, right? But the initial belief at the time may feel as if, um, folks are using me, or they're asking too much of me and I'm not able to deliver. And because of that, I feel resentful, or I feel inadequate, right? So that's another thing that can come up. I feel inadequate because I can't tend to your needs the way that you want, or I'm pouring out more than I have, and I may feel as if it's your fault because of that, right? And so resentment is a big one. But my challenge to that is that, we as individuals have to prioritize self care, right? So no one's going to do it for us. Although folks may show up for us in many ways, it's still our responsibility. Another thing you may see, low energy. Again, pouring out more than you're pouring in, right? So low energy is, a top one. Feeling hopeless. I've been there. I've been there. I've been there. Feeling hopeless as if we can't change our circumstances, um, that there's never enough time for self care, that there's never enough time for us. And it has to be something that we believe can be changed. But the challenge is kind of looking at what our lives are surrounding and how we are, in fact, giving more than we have, right? Next, less patience, a big one. If you're a little snappy or irritable, recognize where that's coming from and if you are taking out enough time for yourself. Mhm. There's a beautiful, I think, outcome that comes from checking in with yourself and then doing it. Saying, I would love to stay in the shower for an extra 5 minutes and just be, and doing that thing and doing the very thing that you need and coming from that. See how that made you feel. See if you then have not only more patience, but a greater sense of self, right? Um, Potentially increased headaches, stomach aches, difficulties falling asleep. Think about, you know, the folks that, and I've also had this with the racing mind at nighttime where you're like, I can't go to sleep because my mind is just racing. Think about those things, okay? Challenges with healthy foods, choosing healthy foods. Think about what that looks like for you. Worsening mental health because we're not taking care of ourselves, because we may not be sleeping, because we may be upset with our spouse or resentful of our children, right? And how those things begin to build, feeling burnout, difficulties concentrating, strain in relationships that I just kind of mentioned, reduced performance at work is another one, and less motivation in social activities.
You gave us a lot, and all of those are serious, But I've experienced just about everything that you said there on that list. But
Same.
individually, it seems like you can kind of address it, and some of these stem back to some of our past topics and episodes when we talk about
Right.
anxiety
Right.
or different things like that. But individually, they seem like inconveniences. When is it time to? This is my favorite question for you, Doc. When is it time to come see you? right? Because all these things don't really seem like, okay, I might wake up and I might, feel, low energy,
Mhm.
or, I might go to bed at night, my mind's racing, but typically these things don't last too long. And so I don't really put a whole lot of emphasis on it, or should
Yeah.
I be putting a lot of emphasis when I start seeing these things? So like, when is it time for me to come seek professional help?
Yeah. I often tell, and I don't know if I've said this before, but often tell clients what brought you in is not what keeps you in therapy. I think I've said that before.
Hmm.
We find that, they may come in because they're having issues with their spouse, or they may come in because of irritability, right? Or lack of sleep, or, difficulties falling asleep, or racing mind, less patience, all those things. And what we may find is that they have placed their own needs at the bottom of their list, right? So think of your list of things to do, Ray, right? Think of your list. If self care is at the bottom of your list, what happens when you have two things left to do at night and you're exhausted? When is self care ever exactly? When is it ever a priority? You see what I mean? So a
Yeah.
lot of folks, it's not that it's not on their list, it's just at the last. It's the last. And they never get to it. And so they may be coming in just from pure exhaustion or poor performance at work. I've seen that, and it finds out it's not that they can't do the job, is that they don't have the energy or the motivation to do the job, right? And it's impacting their overall performance. And so a lot of those questions are there, like, how are you taking care of yourself? And it may sound cliche, but we as individuals, we can only be us, and we can only show up as us, right? So I have to ask those questions. I have to know how you are showing up for yourself, because it's silly to believe that you can show up in a workplace but put yourself behind. You know what I mean? That it's impossible to do that. But in society, we've been taught that it's not about you, that it's about the work, that it's about the performance, and you're last. How is the person that's supposed to be doing the work last? How is that possible? And a lot of the work that I do is really kind of helping folks change that mindset, because many individuals have never prioritized themselves and their needs and their wants, or has never communicated and has never been asked what they want, what they need, what they desire. I, it hurts me because I know it all too well, and I know that life, um, and that life is not fulfilling. It's not fulfilling. And that's why folks get to a place of hopelessness and helplessness, because they've been told that what they feel doesn't matter, that what they do is never enough, and it causes a lot of burnout, but it causes a lack of self-worth and self-identity. And again, self-care is becoming larger, and I love it, but it's also becoming trendy, right?
Yeah.
As if, only some folks deserve it or can
Right.
afford to do it. And I really want to encourage us all today that it's not about money. It's not about those things. It's really about you believing that you deserve to take care of yourself. Yeah. I hope I answered your question.
Yes.
I hope I answered your
I,
question.
I I think you answered it and then beyond. It kind of went above and beyond, which I think is great. But just listening to you and everything that you were just breaking down, talking about making sure you prioritize yourself and put yourself first. Or my mind kept jumping to a couple of places. One being, we've all rode airplanes, right? And they have that announcement. If something's going down, put your mask on first
First.
before you help, somebody else or your kid, because if you're not getting the oxygen, you can't help anybody else. You can't help anybody if you're passed out or if you're knocked out. But the other place my mind kept going, especially when we kept talking about prioritizing yourself over others, is women. I thought about the maternal instincts of like taking care of others, taking care of your kids, your spouse, your significant other,
Mhm.
before you take care of yourself. And so I kind of want you to what words do you have for mothers who kind of, sacrifice themselves to uplift the family? Like how can they make sure that they're prioritizing themselves, taking good self-care habits, and really putting their mask on first before they can take care of the rest of the household?
Yeah. Thank you for asking that, Ray. That's such a genuine question. Seriously. I love that you asked that question because a lot of moms are left behind. And the expectation is that they sacrifice themselves every time. That is the expectation. I was talking to a client, and we were speaking about this very thing. And, I was telling her that mothers are the temperature of the household. You know what I'm saying? If mom is not right, everyone's off. Everyone feels it. Everyone is affected by it.
Mm-hmm.
Your spouse knows who you are. They've learned you throughout the years, but your children have lived in your womb. They know how you feel, how you tick, how you breathe. They know. And so if mom is not good, everyone falls apart. And so that was kind of a turning moment because sacrificing yourself sacrifices your family. And I never want us to get to a place where we feel like that's okay. Not even that that's okay, because who believes that's okay? But that's the way to be, because that's all we know. And for so many years and in so many households, mother has sacrificed herself. And some folks have benefited from it. Some children, some husbands, some spouses, all those have benefited in some way, but they also recognize mom has not been the same. Mom is impatient, mom is irritable, or she's disconnected. That's something else I would add to the list. Detached and disconnected. And so I say all that to say and encourage moms to put themselves first. Ray gave a great example of putting your oxygen mask on first. Because if mom is no good, we are all doomed, right? We are all doomed. So if that is the language we need to hear for mothers to take off the feeling of guilt, mommy guilt, or shame, recognize, like, take that off, because we need you first, and we need you to be your best self. And so only you can do that. Your family, your children cannot do that for you. It has to be your own doing. And so please begin putting you at the top of the list and recognize that you're not sacrificing your family because of it. And I think if we shift that mindset, we recognize, like, oh, I can do this differently, and it can have a better outcome than I ever kind of envisioned.
Dr. Anderson, this has been a great episode so far. I want to go and do a quick commercial break from our sponsors, Boston Scientific. But when we come back, I want to continue the conversation and really talk about how do we create these self-care routines, right? We talked about the benefits, why we need it. We talked about what it looks like when we don't have it. We talked about you don't need it to be at a certain social economic level. Everybody from rich to basic needs to have a routine for them to kind of operate at the highest capacity. So I really want to talk about how do we get there? How do we start to create a routine? So we'll talk about that. And also, I want to remind the audience, we're going to get into the Q&A on the second half of this show. So be sure to scan the code at the top, drop a line in the comment section, and really let us know any questions that you might have. We want to hear from you. And so we'll get back to it in just a few after these messages.
We know how to treat the colds and the coughs. We know how to treat the bumps and the bruises, the cuts and fractures. But how do we treat, I can't afford a day off work to see a doctor? How do we treat, I've never had a doctor who speaks my language? How do we treat, I don't know how to connect with some of my patients? How do we treat, you're not listening? We can't treat what we cannot see. So we have to look closer and see what we're missing. People, patients, misdiagnosed, misunderstood, overlooked. These are the people left out of a system charged with helping them. And it's up to us to find them in our communities, in our relationships, in our data. We're meeting them where they are, discovering who they are. We're taking an honest look to understand their healthcare needs and delivering effective ways to reach them. We don't have all the answers, but together we can find the way to address the gaps in our healthcare system, to provide something better, to find more chances to save more lives. It won't be easy, but we can help make it right, because no one should be missed.
Welcome back to Healthy Doses, brought to you by Boston Scientific, streaming live from STEM City, USA. Today, Dr. Anderson and I are having a great conversation on self-care, or as I like to call it, treat yourself. And so we've talked about a lot of the positives. Why do we need to put ourselves first? Why do we need to have a good self-care routine, and how it benefits our lives no matter who we are? And so I want to continue that conversation. We talked about establish a good sleep routine, different outlets that you can have, whether it's journaling, whether it's prayer, whether it's meditation, physical things like yoga, or even kind of going out and removing yourself from situations. All these things kind of go into self-care routines, depending on who you are and whatever it is that makes you tick and motivates you to kind of be the best version of yourself. My question, Dr. Anderson, to kick off this second half of the show, is how do we create these routines? So let's just say me. Say I have low energy. I'm hopeless. I'm having body aches. I really haven't been taking care of myself, and it's starting to show. How do I go from I guess zero to establishing these routines? Because that's the essence of it, right? It's a routine. A routine kind of takes repetition. So what does that look like? How do I get myself going when I'm so far at the bottom?
Mm-hmm. So first we want to have an idea of what we want to increase in our lives, right? Whether that's sleep, whether that's just to feel good, whether that's to get outside more often, whether that's to take longer showers, meditate more often, stretch every morning. Like, first of all, we have to find out what centers ourselves, right? What we want to increase in our lives, what we want to see happen more often, right? So getting an idea of that. So, center ourselves, knowing what it is that we want to increase, and then kind of brainstorming how we want to incorporate those things in our daily lives. So if I want to take walks, realistically, can I fit that in every day? Right. And if so, when is that happening? Is that on my lunch break? Is that in between clients? One thing I was thinking about for folks that work outside the home, am I taking walks on my lunch? Right? Am I getting outside? And I know folks that do and have incorporated that. Right. So how do I incorporate this realistically in my daily schedule? And then I want to be consistent, right? So I want to set goals for incorporating self-care behavior every day. Realistic goals. And I say that because the language you use is kind of at the bottom. And all that means is that we just haven't practiced self-care in a very long time. It may not be realistic to come out and say, I'm going to do this every day, right? Because if we don't, then we may fall back to hopelessness where it just won't happen. So we want those goals to be realistic according to our schedule. And if we need to move things around to incorporate self-care more often, do those things. If walking every day is something that needs to happen, then you may need to move your schedule around. You may need to decrease the amount of folks or meetings that you have that day, right? And so just looking at what your schedule looks like and then incorporating self-care. After a week or so, you want to evaluate. How is it going? Do you feel better, right? Is this something that I can continue consistently? Do I need to pull back a bit more? Do I need to add a new activity? Should I add stretching on top of walking every day, right? Because I notice I'm a little tight a little bit, right? Should I add a hot shower after each walk? Like whatever that looks like, right? You just want to evaluate after about a week to just see how it's going. And then you want to adjust your approach as you go. Again, it's nothing wrong with change. It's nothing wrong with adding or subtracting. You're not doing it wrong. I remember when I was walking every day, that was beautiful, but it was like, okay, this is getting a bit mundane. How about I add yoga? How about I add walking with a friend? How about I add, right? So just kind of adjusting your approach as you go and recognize that anything that is feeding into your overall wellness is self-care and it's worth doing. So just keep that in mind.
Dr. Anderson, I want to switch gears just slightly. I'm starting to get some questions coming in from our audience, and so I really want to get into that. But before, one of my favorite things to do is, because I know a lot of our audience are professionals, or a lot of our audience are, working in the workplace, working with other people. And so I always like to bring our topics back from a personal, which is largely how we've been addressing self-care.
Right.
And then also kind of give resources in a professional environment, because sometimes those two are separate. And so what does self-care look like in a professional or in the workplace?
So, of course, this is not exhaustive. That just means there are various ways, right? We are just here to add to your bucket, to your list of tools, but just recognize that there are a bunch. A few that kind of come to mind. Remember, I was talking about getting out. So some of those meetings, seeing if you can take meetings outside, seeing if you can do walking meetings, right? See if you can encourage those that you need to have meetings with if they're, near you, or can we take this outside? Can we go sit out on the bench and have this meeting, right? Just trying to get out of that kind of, setting, that indoor setting, right? And just to get out and kind of explore and be in nature, right? So self-care, being outside, but also getting the work done, right? So think about that. Also, encouraging folks and yourself to log off, shut down. Remember, we're not a robot, right?
Doc, what do you mean when you say log off, shut down? You talk about like in the middle of the day in the middle of the meeting, I'm just gonna hit that button, and I'm gone. Where Ray go?
But within limits. Within limits. But remember, we were talking about boundaries last episode, and you were speaking about a coworker that at 5 o'clock they're no longer available. All those things. You also may find the coworker that does not do that, or that encourages you to stay on longer than you want to, right? So where you're encouraging them to let's lock time, our time is up. We've completed what we needed to complete. We are now logging off and shutting down, right? Self-care. We put in our work and we have to recognize that this is now our time and it's necessary. So I'm just encouraging others to also do those very things. But again, priority is you. They don't have to. But in the workplace, we are still a community, and for some workplaces, a family. So you may want to encourage others to do the same. Yeah. So just throwing that out there for you, Ray. Also, thinking about where do you have lunch? And I'm not necessarily asking you, but thinking about, are you having lunch at your computer? If so, get up, get out. Do something for you. We don't have to just sit here and constantly be in a state of work, right? We want to change our environments. We want to allow our own bodies and spirits to know that we have the liberty to kind of shut certain I would say, compartmentalize certain parts of us in that moment. So if we're on lunch, why are we in front of our computers? Let's get up, let's move. It's a perfect opportunity for people to get a bit more of a mental break. And so get up and just kind of take your time away from doing and just be and just be. Also, you know, you want to be an example for other folks. So you want to set a good example for other team members by your own kind of self-care rules and activities. And that just means others kind of, you know, they may see you out on lunch taking walks, right? They may see you moving away from your computer when having lunch and taking a mental break. So basically, it's kind of like practice what you preach. So you also be a good kind of advocate for self-care because others are also watching you. Set communication time boundaries. Encourage, you know, your coworkers to set boundaries around their time. And so when I'm on lunch, when I'm off the clock, I'm not available. Allow flexibility in your workday. So, you know, I don't mean to call anybody out, but if there's no spots available throughout that workday for you, it may be time to just create more free time, if you will, because again, you're not a robot, you're a human, and you deserve to take care of yourself. And I'm also calling myself out, right? And so just opening up more time for you throughout the day so you don't feel so drained and so burned out.
Yes, Dr. Anderson. And I feel like because you brought up boundaries, this is a really good point for me to kind of do a shameless plug for Healthy Doses. So for those of you who have been watching with us from the start, you know, I think this is episode 4 or 5 right now, you might start to see that all of our topics in the past, if you haven't, please go back and take a look because they all start to connect, right? We talked about anxiety, we talked about boundaries, and even when we talk about these self-care routines, a lot of it seems to be stemming back to those previous conversations, setting these boundaries to kind of help routine, but all of these things to reduce stress, to keep this thing low and keep you healthy. All of these topics connect. And so, you know, the whole goal of this show, like I said at the top, is to really help you be the best version of yourself. And it's not one way to do that. It's a combination of all these things that we're talking about each week and kind of putting it into practice inside of your own lives. Dr. Anderson, before we move forward and get to the Q&As, because I do have some questions that are coming in, I think we have to address guilt, right? When we're talking about self-care, when we're talking about, you know, taking time, you know, even like if it's in the workplace, taking time away, that guilt of like, I'm not doing something or something's not getting done, or even like with your family, you know, if I want to take 5 minutes to myself, you know, that might mean dinner might be delayed, or that might mean, you know, something else is going off outside of yourself. And I think that's a big challenge for people when they try to, you know, prioritize themselves. Is when they prioritize themselves, that means everybody else kind of takes a back seat, and there's some guilt that comes with that. So can we talk about the guilt aspect of self-care?
Thank you for bringing that up too, because that's often what happens in regards to why folks don't practice it as often, because for some it is associated with guilt and not, you know, giving as much as they believe that they should to other folk, right? So let's clear up a common misconception, just, you know, out the gate. Like, let's just get to this. Self-care is not synonymous with self-indulgence or being selfish. Please, 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 please recognize that. I don't necessarily know if the trend of it has kind of created that connotation, but I just think it may be just simply a human emotion when we are choosing ourselves, because we are taught to, again, put ourselves to the side for the doing, right, to accomplish the work. But self-care is all about how we are able to take care of our overall needs, but also how we're addressing daily stressors. So it's taking steps to tend to our physical and emotional health, right? to the best of our ability. And recognizing that we can only do that for ourselves because others don't know how to show up for us in the way that we need for ourselves. Mhm. So it's also about the steps you take in your emotional health. And so there may be times where you recognize that you need a break from social media. You need a break from certain environments, that you need to take a vacation, maybe a few days off. But I also recognize that's not everyone's lived experiences, and that's okay. Um, Something else I think about when it comes to self-care and guilt and kind of hopelessness, it feels as if we may not have many options. And through the examples that we talked about, and again, I kind of want to just kind of provide a few more for folks to know that you don't have to even go outside the house to take care of yourself and to give your needs. So Ray, if that's okay, I just want to provide, just a few more um, self-care examples and tips for folks, right? So I think about reading. I think about the luxury of reading. You understand? The
Mm-hmm.
luxury of reading. I struggle with that. Like I pick up a book and I'm at so much kind of appreciation that I have the time, and this is not often, to read a book that I enjoy reading. If we can get 15 to 20 minutes simply just to read for ourselves a book that we like and that we enjoy, that is self-care, right? So I don't want us to feel like we have to go outside the house, that we have to spend hundreds of dollars to do things for us. No, we don't. We don't. Remember we talked about that hot shower, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you are trying to get away, sometimes shower is the thing to do, where you go and lock yourself away and do some visualization work, right? Where the stressors of the day kind of just roll off, where you visualize the stressors just rolling off your body as the water hits you, right? That is ease. We are kind of creating the sense of peace within our bodies and our spirits. So again, we're not going out, we're not spending a lot of money, right? We are just being intentional with our time and what we need. Taking a bath, taking a bath. But I know that's time, I know that's investment, but I also know that's a need. Enjoying a hot cup of coffee or tea in silence. Self-care. Self-care. Writing in our journals. Just taking a moment to address what we're going through, what we're kind of, what's been on our hearts, what's been on our spirits, what's been kind of stressing us. I always tell my clients, it does no good here, right, if we're not processing it out. So writing it out and journaling. Yes. So that's what I'm going to leave you with. I just wanted to add that.
Yeah. And so, Dr. Anderson, I want to get into some of these questions. And so, while we're going through some of these questions submitted by the audience, I also want to challenge the audience. What are some of your self-care practices? What are some things that maybe you can offer up? And so, while we're going through this, use that wow, I was gonna say barcode, the QR code in the top right corner, the one that's flashing right now. Scan that with the camera on your phone, and let us know what are some of your self-help, some of your self-care routines that others may be able to use. Because Tiff, Dr. Anderson, you said a couple of my favorites, and that's reading. Now, I don't know if it's cheating or not, but I do Audible. I do audiobooks. And so
Okay. Love that.
when I'm driving to work, I try to, go to that. Because for me, reading is really kind of like transporting my mind. I'm a big sci-fi, big geek. And so like I'm always reading, Game of Thrones, Harry Potter, things like that. My mind goes into these other places. I also read a lot of biographies and really just try to get into the mind of whoever the topic I'm reading. And so I wholeheartedly support that reading. And I hope Audible doesn't mean I'm cheating, but it really just kind of helps me get there. And then showering is another one of my go-tos. Some of my best thoughts creatively come from just letting the water hit me and just thinking, because there's nothing else to think about. You and your thoughts in the shower. So those are two of mine. But I want to hear from you. I want to hear from the audience. What are some of your self-care practices that we can use? And so, Dr. Anderson, one of the questions that came in kind of takes us back to the workplace. And so the question is, how do you promote self-care in the office as a leader? And so if I'm a manager, how do I encourage my team to take better care of themselves
Mm-hmm.
in the office?
Yeah, great question. Great question. I think first, as the leader, you have the authority to ask your employees, yeah, what that would look like for them. hmm Because I think oftentimes as a leader, we feel as if we have to necessarily come up with all the information, right? And automatically like create it, like I should know this. And I want you to kind of take the burden off of you and recognize that you have a whole community of leaders with you, yeah, that also know what they need and that they communicate what they need. And so whatever you get back, learn, not even, yeah, learn, right? Because it may be new, but uh, create an environment where you can kind of cultivate some of those things, right? So if they say we would love to have less meetings, find a way to cultivate that. Okay, so instead of an hour meeting, let's do a 30-minute meeting, and the last 30 minutes is an email, right? And so asking your community of work, of employees, right? And again, folks that pour into your business and your vision, ask them what they need, and then help cultivate that within the workplace.
Thank you for that, Dr. Anderson. Um, Another question that has come in is, and I think this is really a really good one, is it masculine to participate in self-care? Um, and a large part when you think of self-care is like spa day, manicures, pedicures, massages, and a lot of those things are though misconceptions because I've had massages, I've had pedicures, and they are fantastic. Uh, but a lot of that, first thought is kind of feminine routines. Take care of yourself, fragrances, shopping, if you will. I go shopping for myself, but still, like the overarching uh, thought behind it is those are kind of feminine routines.
Mhm.
So, is it masculine to participate in self care? Is it masculine to take care of yourself?
Is it masculine? It's um, sure, sure. I understand the question. I'm just trying to think how to like men absolutely can partake in self care. Like it's not based on gender in any way. And all those things you named, men also do. Like you said, you also.
Yeah, it's
But
it's misconceptions, but like
it,
the overarching, but
it
that
is.
is the thought process of a lot of people.
Yeah, and I
Mhm.
think it's fair. I think it's a fair process because men aren't represented often in self-care. I think it's a fair assessment and a great question because you see a lot of women, and it's fair as well. We talked about mommy guilt. We talked about what that looks like. But I love that we brought the men in because men are also worthy of self-care and should be practicing it daily. And research was showing that men that do practice self-care have better physical health, right? And so I think what it looks like changes in some ways, right? Where it may be more focused on physical health, where some men's self-care may be kind of like gym, working out, what they're eating, kind of being active. And so when we think of self-care, remember it involves our body, intellect, mind, practical needs, social needs, and our overall spirit, right? And so that's for everyone. But some benefits for men that practice self-care, uh, they have improved like workplace focus and increased social exposure, increased kind of awareness and appreciation for hobbies and passions, and strong social bonds. So I highly encourage men to practice self-care because there are great benefits for you, and just don't let the stigma interrupt that at all, you guys, because you deserve it too. You absolutely deserve it.
Yes, yes, and I guess speaking for all men here. No, I'm just not speaking for all men, but pedicures, those things are amazing. Most of the people who I hear talking about pedicures haven't had one. They're the best thing ever. And you have to take care of your feet. Your feet is the most important part of your body. It takes you and moves you all around.
Yeah.
Take care of yourself, gentlemen. Take care of yourself, whether it's shopping for yourself, whether it's gaming. I'm a gamer. I like to think, after a long, hard day, if I come home, eat dinner with my wife, so yeah, sometimes I'll go and play the game, because that really kind of helps me release the outside world. And so there are definitely different things that you can do as a man or masculine, or I'm not even that games are masculine. I want to be clear about that. But there are things you can do that make you happy, to kind of help you reset and kind of keep your mental strong, if you will.
Yeah.
Dr. Anderson, I know we're getting towards the end of the show. There's more questions, but unfortunately we can't get to them all. But I thank everybody for participating. But you want to just kind of wrap up today's show, really leave the audience with something, maybe resources that they may have, be able to kind of take with them for today's topic.
Of course. I enjoyed today's show. I enjoy all the shows, but I love that we are tackling the misconception of self-care. So if we can take anything away from today, my hope and intention is that we recognize that self-care doesn't have anything to do with privilege. Although it may seem like that, recognize that we can prioritize ourselves in any manner, and that it doesn't necessarily take a lot of money or even necessarily a lot of resources. It really just takes the intention to want to show up for ourselves, right? And again, if that's simply getting up, doing our hair and brushing our teeth, right? That is self-care. And that's enough for that moment. When you are in the need of showing up for yourselves in more ways, again, think of the ways that we can start brainstorming how to do that and create a schedule around what that may look like in your life, right? But you're never too busy. And if you believe that you are, then we must move things away and around to prioritize our lives. Yeah. So for next week's episode, we're going to be tackling procrastination. We're going to talk about what that looks like and what that feels like in our lives. We're going to answer you all's questions about how you're managing it or struggling with it. And you're going to be able to take home effective tools for how to manage it in your lives. So join us next week at 11 a.m. and we will be here ready to really talk about what procrastination looks like and how it is affecting all of us.
Dr. Anderson, I might need to be in the audience for this one, because I feel like you're speaking directly to me. So anyway, everyone, thank you again for joining us for Healthy Doses. Thank you again to our sponsors, Boston Scientific. And we hope everyone is really kicking off their 4th of July weekend with a bang. And thank you for starting it with us. Until next week, everyone have a good time. This is Healthy Doses. Thank you.
Take care.
For more than 40 years, Boston Scientific has relied on our spirit of relentless innovation to advance science for life. We have the privilege and responsibility to deliver higher quality, less invasive, and more accessible device solutions, and the need has never been greater. Boston Scientific technologies are used to treat roughly 30 million patients around the world each year. Across our business, our products are supported by vast clinical data, including bench testing, randomized control trials, and ongoing real-world evidence to ensure the highest quality products make it into the hands of our customers. And we're always looking for ways to provide even more effective therapies and solutions. We invest over $1 billion annually in research and development to sustain a robust pipeline of meaningful innovations. We continuously strengthen our manufacturing and operations capabilities with artificial intelligence and advanced microelectronics to create devices that are smaller and smarter. And we're collaborating with our medical partners and physicians to advance digital capabilities with remote device support and a broad scope of training and education programs. Advancing science for life is also about supporting our employees and the communities in which we operate. Now more than ever, we rely on our values to guide our company as a global business and as a global corporate citizen. We're working to help confront healthcare inequities and social injustice, not only with financial contributions, but through volunteer service, advocacy, and expanding market accessibility. We're also focused on environmental initiatives that move us towards our goal of becoming carbon neutral by 2030. The unmet needs are great, but the future of healthcare is bright. Our innovation centers provide a place to explore opportunities, examine solutions, and see what lies ahead for medicine. Together, we can continue the relentless pursuit of innovation to help everyone live longer, healthier lives and make a difference all over the world.